Hello everyone, this is Felix from Luxo, and today I'm going to talk about the current state of Soltech development. As this is a hype topic, frequently asked questions include: how can Soulbound tokens be integrated within the LSP ecosystem? And how can universal profiles favor the decentralized society? So within this presentation, I hope I can answer most of the questions, and I will start by introducing you to Soulbound tokens, then outlining how contract-based accounts can be implemented for decentralized societies. And at the end, I want to talk about some things you may consider when you are developing bound assets. So first, an introduction about Soulbound tokens. Within the current NFT landscape, NFTs are non-fungible tokens, and they are primarily used to represent something with monetary value. But this monetary value might not be the primary interest. For instance, if you imagine an organization that wants to hand out or document proof of attendance, a skill or accomplishment, then they would hand out tokens to specific blockchain accounts, and then they don't want them to resell the asset afterwards because it's specifically bound to them. So a good introduction here would be the statement from Vitalik Buterin saying, people are not really interested in whether or not you paid someone who attended the event. They're interested in whether or not you personally attended this event. And so Soulbound tokens or Soulbound NFTs are issued by someone or something, and then they cannot move to a new address, except there's some social recovery or community-based recovery around them, making them social bound in a way, because then it's more or less about the social circle you have around you that can recover assets. So Soulbound tokens cannot move, and therefore they are non-transferable. And they could also have some delete or burn function. But most importantly, they would have some surroundings where you can accept or reject the token itself. Because consent is super important when something is bound forever. There's a huge potential of spam attacks. So it could be that there are spam accounts handing out some Soulbound tokens to true accounts or true identities, and then they would end up having the spam attached to their accounts forever. So this is a really important topic, but there's not only one SBT standard. There could be multiple and also hybrid versions. For instance, there could be NFTs that are handed out at the conference, and then they will get locked after a certain time frame is over. Another thing that could be implemented is the revoke logic. So there might be an organization with some permissions and a leadership, and they hand out some tokens, and you're not able to send or resell them, but the organization or the leadership is always able to revoke some assets or token or permission from you if you behave incorrectly. So non-transferable assets or soulbound tokens are really about interpersonal interactions, skills, or accomplishments you want to publicly share on your profile. So there are a lot of implementations out there. We keep track of them or research around the field, but I just want to show you some quick implementations and give you a view of what's out there. So of course, there's Soulbound tokens directly coming with some revoke or recover functionality within the token. So then the token is handed out to a blockchain address, and then the organization would be incorporated at mint. So when the token is created, you directly add your DAO that can revoke stuff, or you could also just link an amount of friends that are then able to recover this asset when they work together. And there are also some minimal functionalities that just lock the transfer function. So when you first mint or doing the first transfer of a token, then there's a Boolean that gets locked for the transfer function. And then every time you want to do a certain transfer with this token, it will just deny the access if the token has already been transferred over one time. And another topic that is coming to the horizon more and more are soulbound badges. So you could think of having an NFT, and if you're the first one that mints an NFT, then there could be a badge that is handed out to you as the proof of first ownership. And this is kind of your certificate to this NFT. And if you sell the NFT, it's kind of worthless because it's not connected to the first proof of ownership anymore, or the certificate that it's the real NFT that you got there and that you were the real identity receiving it. So there are a lot of use cases. It's really about what's the purpose of the token, what's around the token, basically also for reject and accept transfers. And yeah, so at some point, non-transferable tokens would already be enough to be soulbound. And in other scenarios, you would have additional functionality within the token itself if the surrounding don't provide any functionality like this. So there's this question about, now we have soulbound tokens, but there are already bound properties that you can have on a blockchain account, and they are called verifiable credentials within the self-sovereign identity field. And here I want to do a quick comparison, how they can go along or how they are really instantiated. So both claims of an profile or blockchain address, but also bound assets are managed in a user-centric way, meaning you keep all the data and relations, and they're always related to an identity or entity, could be anything, also devices. And bound assets are more like the extroverted way because they focus on public data that can be used for social graphs or reputation. They need the blockchain data layer because they are sitting on top of the blockchain and favor interpersonal interaction skills or accomplishments you want to have. And so bound assets are really a crypto native way of doing things, where claims are really the bridge from worlds, or like the physical to the digital world. Claims really focus on sensitive data that is bound to an blockchain address or profile, and they're really institutional, meaning you have your driver license and you will get it as a claim to your profile or your blockchain account. And then this could also exist without the blockchain. You just use the blockchain to prove it, that you have this certain data set, like for instance, driver license or the affiliation to a university. And so claims really favor proving some traits without revealing the data, because most of it is stored off-chain and you can just prove different parts of it, where bound assets are really about showing off things you have on the blockchain. And yeah, they complement each other. There are no, there's no war about what will be public claims or bound assets. They have their own use cases. So because bound assets are initially public, they're really unsuitable for private data, because even if you have the private data connected off-chain with zero knowledge proofs, then you still have the transaction flow and you can follow all the interactions you did with this. And the visibility makes dealing with personal data or sensitive data really impossible. So it's more about managing the ownership or organizational forms in a decentralized society. And for claims, they're really used to share informations one-sided and making them really unsuitable for a joint social application. So if you imagine an organization having or owning assets, then claims are not really a good way of sharing access to some assets or some data sets, because it's really one-sided. Only one blockchain account or address can say, hey, I want to share this. And if you have joint ownership of something, then this would not be a good way of claims, because there might be some instance that does not want this information to get out there. So the invisibility of a data set makes establishing a reputation system or decentralized society really impossible on a governance level. And so there's this unnatural right to disclose the relationship without the consent of the others. And yeah, when we talk about decentralized societies, then what are they even? You can imagine them like social media applications we have in Web 2, but they are not governed by big companies that own your data or manage your user profiles. Here in decentralized societies, users own their own data, claims, and interaction graphs, as well as their shared content in a decentralized peer-to-peer way on a blockchain or a sidechain. And users can take the data backpack of multiple identities they own with them, regardless if the platform continues to exist or not. So you will also have this backpack you can take when a social media application shuts down, and you can still take it with you and show, hey, back in the day, I had this reputation from this organization or platform, and here you can prove it to others. So you take away, you're taking your identity with you. And now we want to talk about contract-based accounts and how they can be better enclosures for decentralized societies. So the origin of the discussion is coming from the Decentralized Society paper of Glenn Whale, Butcher Olhaver, and Vitalik Buterin, stating, in order to DSOC to work, we need soul recovery and a wide variety of SBTs across discrete communities to be secure. So what will really come first? The token handout or the strong social recovery? The problem is mainly related to externally owned accounts, and there's a chicken and egg problem when it comes to decentralized societies. On one hand, there are externally owned accounts like regular wallets we use, as for instance, MetaMask, and they would need a huge amount of SBTs to become valid identities and state, hey, there's human interactions behind this address. But they won't be issued when you can easily use access to them. And there needs to be a way to just secure this account. On the other side, social recovery systems or community recovery only really works on embedded groups. So these embedded groups need all the tokens to form an authentic social graph or social circle around them. So there's no real starter here, and we kind of end up in this dilemma. Problems on top, we face what happens if the user wants to move his identity over to a new address and has good intentions? How do you prove he does not sell it to another account or blockchain address? And what happens if the asset is wrapped in a storage contract? For instance, SBTs are bound to one blockchain address, but what if this address is a storage contract that can change ownership by themselves? Here, the ownership of the storage contract would change all the time, and the asset address would stay the same, meaning that the asset is still soul-bound to the storage contract, but in behind, the ownership of the storage contract always changes, so the asset is not really soul-bound, it's just bound to a storage. Lots of other problems regarding the management. So when you have an externally owned account, you only have one backup phrase. So what happens when the access to this address is lost? then all of the issuers of your Soulbound tokens would have to burn this old asset and then hand out or reissue an asset to a new address. So there's a huge management effort that they would have to face, and also a huge effort and costs, because these all are transactions. Another problem is how we can guarantee identities and souls if they don't have a visible connection to the physical world. So things that are more developed by proof of humanity or WorldCoin. So when you attach all these Soulbound tokens, they want to show off on your digital profile, then how you really know the identity behind is really you as a physical human. And this basically gets more complicated if you also take into account digital only personalities that exist within the internet. And lastly, how do you manage multiple personas and applications with only one externally owned account? Because if everything is soulbound, then you end up with lots of tokens on only one address, and social graphs would really need to figure out a way how they fetch this data from only one externally owned account, since there's no really organization thing going on there. So this really comes to one question: what really is a soulbound token without a soul? Because when there are so many problems related to the framework of a soulbound token, what can we do to better the scenario? So now we know it's much more about the enclosure of this token than we thought. And the token as a non-transferable token is actually really simple. So there needs to be a way to develop a soul in a standardized way, having all the functionality with security, recovery, and also consent implemented in them. And then we can also solve the dilemma and the chicken and egg problem. So here I just outlined all the issues we have with externally owned accounts as souls. So as I already told you, there's only one single recovery phase, and you don't want to bind your identity in the internet to one static phrase or admin key that cannot be changed if compromised from someone. Another point here is that every attestation service would have to implement an interface to burn or reissue if you transfer the SBT. So ideally, you would have recovery on the soul itself, so the address never changes, just the ownership, and this cannot be done with a single key pair. Then the third point here, that externally owned accounts do not have data attached. Like, they only serve as an address to hold assets or sign data. And that's why we often use Web2 to receive additional informations, use some faucets within Web3, or even get handles to some services. And yeah, externally owned account cannot store the data themselves. So that's a problem, because you never know who's behind it, and you can only attach assets and not really something to the profile itself. External accounts also lack the functionality to act on happen transfer. So this is more of the consent that we talked about. So it's super hard to manage assets even before building more complex data economies like social media applications, because you cannot really deny stuff, but you also cannot really structure it. And most services using external owned accounts still gather the information from the account using centralized projects like Etherscan, because you can't really read all the information from the address itself. So if there would be a way to connect data to a blockchain account, then this would also kind of solve this problem here of using centralized services for additional information, because accounts then could store all the information about received assets and also received Soulbound tokens. Lastly, I already talked about it, that there's no structure for owning multiple social graphs or tokens within externally owned account address. So this is mostly a problem that Lens is facing at the moment. So they have in social media applications using NFTs, and not only can NFTs be sent to others, so you could follow someone, receive the NFT, and then there could be spam accounts that just follow spam profiles and send them over to true ones. And then true identities just are faced with a lot of chaotic, a chaotic front page where they see all these spam messages. And so there really needs to be a way to structure this better, because all the NFTs also are just stored on one externally owned account address. So if you end up using your Lens profile, for instance, for like 2 years or 3 years, then you have thousands of NFTs showing up on one address. And if you want to fetch them or search through them, then it's really, really chaotic, and you don't really have a structured way of sorting them within your account. And yeah, the conclusion here is that there really needs to be an extensive on-chain functionality that docks onto externally owned accounts and wallets how we use them. But we can also think of, what if we just use smart contracts, not only for these extensive account features, but incorporate them as accounts frame that are controlled by externally owned accounts. So this way, we could have a lot of benefits. So the different enclosure types here would include that externally owned accounts as identities needs lots of bounds assets to get decentralized society starting, and they're just there to verify data ownership. So with externally owned accounts, it's purely about what users have acquired on their blockchain address. And on the other side, if we use smart contract-based accounts for identities or profiles, then they can hold information and claims themselves while being controlled by multiple externally owned accounts. So it's more about what users are through the information they have on their account, and not really what they became through holding assets. So that's where the LSP ecosystem comes into play, because we developed the ERC 725 account scheme and an ecosystem around it. So here we have a smart contract-based account and a modular set of smart contract standards, like the universal receiver, where we can just act on transfers and reject or accept tokens. But we can also attach metadata for a universal profile to this account. And we also have a standard of attaching digital metadata to assets. And then we keep track of all the received assets within the smart contract-based accounts. And you can have a list of all the assets you own on your profile directly. On top of this, there's also the key manager, where you can just control all the permissions to your account. So there's not only one static backup phrase for your account or universal profile, there can be multiple. And then you can connect a lot of devices to your identity with different rights and roles. And so this would make sense in really increasing security for your Soulbound tokens. And this would also mean that you don't have to reissue all these Soulbound tokens. You just change ownership on the key manager. And if you lost access, then you can always connect a recovery scheme directly to the universal profile, and then they can generate a new key, and then the address would always be the same. On top of it, there's also a vault standard, so you can organize all your assets you receive in a way how you want. May it be application per application, or you could also structure different social graphs. So this is really a big ecosystem about social interactions, reputation. And now with the Soulbound token hype, this goes really long with what we've built in the last years. So having contract-based souls for SBTs, or how we call it, universal profiles, the contract is controlled by multiple external accounts, and they can use the key manager. So it can be controlled by multiple devices and keys, and much more safely. The address of the contract always stays the same, only the controls will change. Smart contract-based accounts can here contain all the metadata for storing verifiable information and claims on your identity directly. So you could add all the information from you to the profile, and then your profile can start gaining reputation before you even own any tokens. And of course, these contract-based accounts can act on happen transfers, and all the claims could be directly connected to your profile itself. For organization, you have the vaults. So we kind of solved all the problems that came along with external accounts when it comes to holding Soulbound tokens. So here you can have a little visualization how this works. So in the middle, you can have your soul as a universal profile that sits within the universal profile extension, where you can just use your profile and act on different transactions. And then you could have all these non-transferable tokens and SBTs connected to your profile directly and organized within vaults. And on the same way, you just can add claims directly to the profile. So you could add schemes where you have like an organization that hands out SBTs when you have certain claims or when you prove certain claims on your profile. And this would also kind of solve the issue where you hand out SBTs to contracts that are storage contracts and may change ownership over time. Because here you could come up with schemes where external services just use claims in order to hand out SBTs in the first place. So if you want to have deeper insights and explanations on how this can all go together, I wrote an article called Luxo Media, so the next wave of social media for the blockchains. And this basically states how contract-based accounts favor decentralized societies and solve some fundamental issues I already outlined in this presentation. And yeah, now at the end, let's talk about some things you may consider when developing Soulbound tokens and how we may move beyond all the token hype. So the question really is like, when token, why token, everything is a token. We started this in the last years, and we had internal discussions within Luxo about why does everything need to be a token. So we also attended some events about decentralized societies, and the outcome was really that the current development is making Soulbound assets as a token. And when everything is a token or even an NFT, then it's very cost expensive, and most tokens do not contain social functionalities themselves. You would still check the contract of the DAO if you have like permissions, and not only do it with the token you have or the accomplishment you receive to your account. And you might also not need an unique token all the time. So there could also be regular tokens that are soulbound for a specific use case that you can turn into some utility within the decentralized organization. So blockchain storage is a costly privilege, and so everyone should be mindful with it and really ask themselves if the Soulbound token is really necessary in this case. And yeah, the other way around would just be having some social graphs that could also be determined by transactions without linking assets. Or rights, duties, and votes or login permissions of DAOs could also just be captured within the DAO contract. and you don't need all the separate smart contracts out there just representing a simple token. And yeah, non-transferable tokens of events could also be non-divisible tokens, and you could end up having an event that just hands out regular tokens instead of always creating an NFT for this, which also saves a lot of costs. And yeah, the relations written within the DApp contract could also be checked and tracked on demand, rather than just always going to the profile and looking up if they own a token or NFT for this DApp. So tokens are really cost expensive, and there are a lot of other ways around it that are much more cost effective. So we encourage everyone to think outside the box when it comes to Soul Tech. And yeah, some standardizations may not include doing everything as a token itself. And yeah, the essence is really keeping it simple and modular. So we know within the externally owned account system, it's really hard to implement soulbound tokens because they cannot attach any data. They don't have the reject or accept functionality for transfers within the blockchain address. So they would need a lot of functionality contracts around external accounts. And here it's really about the ecosystem around a token. So within the Luxor ecosystem, such a bound asset could just be seen as a combination of features and standards. So the soulbound token could just be a regular LSP7 or LSP8, a simple non-transferable token. So LSP7 and 8 by default are transferable, but you could just lock this functionality. And then you could come up with a Lego block system where you can just implement consent via a universal receiver standard that you add. And also recovery could be an interface that you just dock onto the asset or the DAO itself. So the token and the asset itself stays really minimal and just connects to other LSPs that are developed. And yeah, that's just things you may consider when you develop something. Nothing needs to be a fully fleshed out, huge standard or contract. You can just keep it minimal, build it in a modular way, and then just connect pieces as you would like. So if you still have questions about universal profiles, how they can go along with SBTs or how they can act as souls, let's connect in our Discord server. You can just ask questions there and we will get back to you. And yeah, thanks for listening and have a nice day. See you soon.